Today in the bunker, we're going to build a thermal cooling unit suitable for use in the Underhive or the Wasteland. This is just a standard Parmesan cheese container. Obviously it's empty. So what we're going to do is get this ready to paint or to modify. We're just going to take a knife and we're going to remove this label. Will mostly just peel right off fairly easily. It's kind of like heat shrunk on the ends. But it's not glued on, which is nice. So let's get rid of that. And because this is slick plastic, I'm going to take some sandpaper and we're just going to rough this up. Just to give that a little tooth. I did the same thing to the cap. I didn't do that portion. Well, I guess I could. That's not really going to be exposed, but we may glue that to something, so it's probably not a bad idea. And I just used emery cloth, but you could use any kind of sandpaper. Just you want to roughen up the texture just a little bit, just to give the paint something to stick to. One of the other things we're going to do to prep this, we're going to take some of this round granny grating and we're going to glue it to the top. But I'm going to paint that black inside because painting it black after this is glued on there will be a royal pain. We're also going to try some contact cement. The question had been raised in a previous video whether granny grating would stick with contact cement, so we're going to find out. To fit this, we're just going to cut off this outside ring of the granny grating, and you can just take your hobby knife and very carefully go around that and cut that off. Alright, so we'll cut that off and trim it up. That inside is just painted with some black craft paint. Doesn't have to be anything fancy, you just want to get a black undercoat there. So we're going to try this contact cement. I've never tried it before, but I ran out of the other type that I normally use. So we'll see what this does. This works. It's contact cement. You paint both sides until they set up, and then you put them together. So that's very runny. All right, well, we'll clean that up. All right, disaster averted, I think. So we've got the glue applied to both pieces. I'm going to let that set up for about 15 minutes and then we'll put it together. Alright, this stuff seems to have a little bit more working time. It's a little more forgiving. You could probably reposition this if you needed to, if you stuck it together. We'll see once it sets up how firm that is, but I suspect it'll probably be okay. It does stink. It doesn't smell good at all. The weld wood doesn't really bother me. This stuff's kind of nasty. But we'll see what it does. To this piece I want to add some piping, and I just used some of that typical plastic piping you buy on the Amazons. It holds together pretty well with Plastruct or similar cements. And I'm going to cut an opening, and then we're going to glue this to the side of this, but these will be in there. So I've kind of marked out a rough thing. So I'm just going to take a hobby knife and just cut out a space. Being careful not to upset that because it takes a while for that to dry. So this plastic is kind of thick. I'm going to struggle with that and we'll be back. Alright, so we just took a hobby knife, just very carefully, well, kind of sloppily, cut out an access port for these pipes. Those will fit in there like that, and we'll put some pieces on the outside, some trim to kind of dress that up a little bit. I believe probably we'll use some hot glue to put this together. I don't really want to work with this stuff any more than I have to because it does stink. So let me get the hot glue gun fired up and we'll get ready to do that. Alright, the hot glue was an epic fail. It does not like this sort of plastic. I did find a little bit of my other Weldwood contact cement, so I've applied that to both pieces. We're going to let that set up and then we'll put it together, and that should be fairly bulletproof. I also cut out from just some thin plastic card and punched in rivets that plate, which I then cut out kind of a figure-8 shape for the pipes to fit through, just to sort of dress up that where they go into the device. The other contact cement worked swimmingly and didn't stink quite as bad, so lesson learned there. All right, so let's see what else we can stick on this. On this piece here, I just stuck down with some super glue, and I did put a little bit of hot glue at the bottom to try and strengthen that a little bit, just to keep it from wiggling. To add a little more visual interest and kind of break up the monolithic nature of it, I just made some more of these panels out of plastic card and used our handy dandy rivet tool to just rivet them and just super glued them in various places where maybe it might need a repair or whatever. So we'll fish around and see what else we can stick on there. And just to add a little more visual interest, I made like a control box. Just took some chipboard and just kind of cut out a rough box pattern. I sat the edge of this on the chipboard and traced around it to get that curve so it'll sit fairly snug against it. Also, I went in with the 2-part sew-on snaps and drilled some holes and just super glued a couple of those in place as valves or handles for valves. So we're going to take this, I'm going to seal this with some Mod Podge and all that, and then we'll get ready to prime all of this. I went ahead and hot glued the control box on. I also glued a piece of very thin EVA, the Fun Foam, just to give that some grip on the bottom, make it not quite so slippery. Some of my gaming surfaces are a little slick, so this will hopefully keep it from sliding around too much on the table if the table gets bumped. So we're going to let that firm up just a bit, and I also put Mod Podge and black paint on this grinding grating to help the paint stick. So we're going to let that firm up and then we'll go prime that with some black spray paint. Now that our black primer is dry, we're going to go ahead and give this a base coating of burnt umber. I'm doing that because I'm building up a rust effect. You don't have to use burnt umber. You could just start with your primary color and go from there, but that's how I'm going to do it. So we'll get that ready. I've just thinned this out about 50-50 with some water, and we'll just go ahead and put on a good base coat over the whole thing. So there's our undercoat of burnt umber. So what we're going to do next is take some half and half mixture of silver and black. I'm going to paint all of these pipes and the walkway, all the exposed metal bits, probably some of these patches and all that. So let's get that mixed up. Alright, we'll just kind of overbrush that on there. If some of that brown shows through in spots, that's fine. We just want to give this kind of a aged metallic look. To give it that abandoned Soviet look, I'm going to go for this mint green color. It's also kind of a seafoam. A lot of industrial equipment across the world painted in similar shades. So we'll try sponging some of that on. Alright, we'll cut some of the parts that are tight up against the pipes and whatnot. We'll cut that in with the brush. So we'll give this a good coat here. With that color applied, I'm going to start sponging on some nutmeg brown, try and heighten that rust effect in spots. So we'll just take a sponge, take a little bit of that paint, and we'll just kind of build up a rusty texture here and there, wherever you think it needs some rust, and especially on these patches that are kind of look more like a bare metal. All right, so we'll add that. Once you've added the nutmeg brown, just kind of sponge that on randomly. I'm going to go back and I'm going to add some raw sienna just to kind of highlight some of that rust on the high spots and kind of just sort of make that pop a little bit. So we're just going to use this straight. And we'll do the same thing with a sponge. We'll just apply that wherever we might need it. That's a little heavy. So we'll kind of knock that back a little bit with a clean sponge. All right, and we'll just do that wherever we think we need to. With the raw sienna applied, you can either keep adding to that rust effect, or if it's rusty enough to taste, then we can start filling in some of the details. We're going to paint this little computer screen, some of these little lights, this little 3D bit here, 3D printed bit that I made. And all of these things, totally optional. Don't have to have any 3D printed bits. This plastic card with the rivets, you could do that with chipboard, very thin serial card packet, and a 1/16 inch hole punch to make those rivets. You'd have to glue them on individually, and boy, wouldn't that take some time. But you could certainly do it. I've done it on previous projects. Things like these snaps for valve handles, pretty simple to get, and they're fairly cheap. I just drilled a hole and just super glued that in place. So we're going to add some markings and just try to sort of make everything pop a little bit. Alright, there's some details added. Painted the valve handles, put some text on the computer screen, added the lights. So next we're going to stencil on some letters. These are brand new, I just got these. And we're going to use one of these good things. So let's tart that up. Alright, to do this, we're just going to lay that stencil on there and try to sponge a single letter and or number just with some black craft paint. Don't want to load too much up on the sponge. And you can kind of see through the stencil, which is kind of nice for lining it up. And then we'll just very carefully sponge that. That came out pretty good. Alright, so we'll add a few more. Alright, well, I'm pretty happy how that came out. Those stencils work pretty well. You got to be kind of careful. It'd probably be best if you taped off the letters you're not using, because I did have that where it would kind of spill over into the next one. So you got to be mindful of that. But otherwise, they're pretty forgiving. So let's take some glamour shots and have a look at this. Alright, and there's our thermal cooling tower completed. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I appreciate you watching. And remember to like and subscribe and all those good things. Hit the bell and try and have a fantastic day.